Hey guys! Tonight we're going to take a journey, not to the triumphant battlefields of ancient Greece or the philosophical debates of its academies, but high above, to the mythical peaks of Mount Olympus itself. Imagine this the clouds part, revealing a shimmering, golden palace, echoing with the laughter of powerful beings. The air is thick with the scent of ambrosia, nectar, and divine power. You see figures of breathtaking beauty, clad in flowing robes, wielding lightning bolts and golden bows. This isn't the sanitized, heroic pantheon of children's stories or Disney movies. It's a terrifying, volatile, and often utterly immoral assembly of cosmic forces, whose personal dramas and petty squabbles had devastating consequences for mortals. You probably won't survive this without being turned into a tree, abducted, or smote by a thunderbolt. But we're going to dive into the truly disturbing truth about Greek gods. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling adventurous, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in ancient Greece, perhaps during the archaic or classical periods, when the myths of the Olympian gods deeply permeated every aspect of life. These weren't distant, benevolent deities. They were vibrant, often unpredictable, and intensely human-like beings, embodying both the grandeur of nature and the darkest aspects of human passion. From the highest king to the lowliest farmer, every Greek lived under the pervasive influence of these gods, constantly seeking their favor, fearing their wrath, and trying to decipher their inscrutable wills. The popular image of the Greek gods often focuses on their immense power, their beauty, and their roles as patrons of various arts and sciences. But this idealized view often glosses over a far more complex, often disturbing, reality. The Olympian pantheon, led by Zeus, was less a harmonious divine family and more a dysfunctional, perpetually feuding, and morally ambiguous assembly, whose actions routinely inflicted immense suffering on mortals, often for petty reasons, personal grudges, or fleeting desires. Your perspective tonight is that of a keen observer, a silent witness to the true nature of these powerful beings, stripped of their heroic gloss. You will see the depths of divine cruelty, the casual indifference to human pain, and the terrifying consequences of being caught in the crossfire of their eternal squabbles. You quickly learn that relying on the benevolence of these gods is a fatal mistake, and that piety often meant trying to avoid drawing their capricious attention. One mainstream historical fact that immediately shatters any romanticized view of the Greek gods is that the Olympian pantheon, as depicted in ancient Greek myths and literature, G. Homer, Hesiod, frequently engaged in acts of rape, deception, petty revenge, murder of mortals or even other deities, and various forms of cruel and unjust interference in human lives, reflecting a complex divine morality far removed from modern ethical standards. These gods were powerful, but profoundly flawed, embodying human vices on a cosmic scale. Think about it. Your idea of a divine protector might be a shining beacon of justice. Theirs was a celestial bully with a serious temper problem and a long list of ex-lovers, a particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the Greeks' pragmatic, yet often fatalistic view of their gods is the common practice of making offerings and performing rituals not just to gain favor, but specifically to avert a god's wrath or to simply avoid their attention altogether. Many Greeks believed that drawing too much positive attention from a god could be just as dangerous as drawing their anger, as divine jealousy or a sudden whim could lead to misfortune. Imagine performing religious ceremonies not because you want something, but because you just want them to ignore you and not turn you into a spider. Historians still argue whether the anthropomorphic human-like and morally ambiguous nature of the Greek gods, as depicted in their myths, primarily served as a cultural mechanism for ancient Greeks to explore and grapple with complex human ethical dilemmas and the inherent chaos of the natural world, allowing them to project human flaws onto a divine stage, or if it was predominantly a reflection of a society that truly believed in unpredictable, powerful, and often amoral deities, making human suffering an accepted part of a chaotic cosmic order. Was it psychological exploration or actual belief that made their gods so disturbing? As you gaze upon the divine figures on Olympus, their beauty undeniable, their power absolute, you quickly feel a profound sense of awe, but also a growing unease. The laughter seems too loud, the arguments too fierce, the casual disregard for the mortal realm too chilling. The ambrosia, the nectar, the golden palace, all mask a terrifying inner world of jealousy, lust, and brutal retribution. The very air seems to hum with ancient grudges and the terrifying potential for divine wrath. You quickly realize that living under the gaze of these gods is a constant gamble, a perpetual attempt to navigate their volatile moods and avoid their capricious attention. Your piety is not a guarantee of safety, but merely an attempt to stack the odds slightly in your favor, knowing that even the most devout can become victims of a passing divine whim. And you're about to discover just how profoundly disturbing the truth about Greek gods really was, transforming divine majesty into a terrifying, very human display of cosmic power. Having been introduced to the terrifying, morally ambiguous world of the Olympian gods, your gaze immediately narrows to the figure who embodies their immense power and their most disturbing flaws. Zeus, supreme tyrant. Serial abuser. Forget the noble, wise patriarch of popular myth. The king of the gods was a volatile, often cruel, and profoundly dangerous deity, whose insatiable lust, jealous rages, and casual indifference to the suffering he inflicted upon mortals and even other gods make him less a benevolent ruler and more a cosmic bully with unchecked power. You quickly learn that his lightning bolts aren't just for punishing hubris, they're for silencing dissent, enforcing his will, and devastating anyone who crosses his path or catches his eye. It's like being ruled by a very powerful, very charming, but utterly narcissistic and sexually predatory mob boss who can literally smite you with a flick of his wrist. You stand on the ethereal plains of Olympus, or perhaps in the sacred groves below, observing the king of the gods. He is undeniably magnificent, broad-shouldered, with a booming voice that can shake the heavens, and a gleaming lightning bolt ever ready in his hand. He rules with absolute authority over gods and mortals, presiding over justice, however skewed, and commanding the very elements. But beneath this awe-inspiring facade lies a terrifyingly unpredictable temper and a profound lack of moral restraint. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of the king of the gods is that ancient Greek myths are replete with accounts of Zeus, the king of the gods, engaging in numerous acts of rape, deception often disguising himself to commit seduction, violent punishment of those who defied him or revealed his illicit affairs, and the arbitrary infliction of suffering on mortals, reflecting a powerful but deeply flawed and often tyrannical divine authority. His actions frequently led to tragic consequences for those he targeted, or for those associated with them. Think about it. Your supreme deity is essentially a serial abuser who routinely gets away with it. Imagine the sheer scale of his conquests. Zeus's countless affairs, often pursued through cunning deception or outright force, are a recurring theme in Greek mythology. He transformed himself into a swan to seduce Leda, a bull to abduct Europa, a shower of gold to infiltrate Danae's tower, or even a cloud to trick Io. These weren't consensual encounters. They were often acts of divine rape or abduction, committed by a god who saw mortals, and even goddesses, as objects to be taken, his desires paramount, their will irrelevant. The consequences for these victims were often horrific. Leda bore children who brought immense sorrow. Io was turned into a cow and tormented by a gadfly. Danae's son Perseus faced endless dangers, and Europa was taken far from her home. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the disturbing implications of Zeus's promiscuity and the Greeks' attempt to explain lineage is the existence of numerous myths where the lineage of various heroes, kings, and even entire cities is traced back to Zeus's illicit affairs, effectively legitimizing powerful human bloodlines through divine sexual predation. Imagine finding out your entire royal lineage started because a god tricked your great-great-great-grandmother into having an affair with him disguised as a bird. Historians still argue whether the numerous myths depicting Zeus's sexual violence were primarily a reflection of patriarchal power dynamics in ancient Greek society, serving to normalize male dominance and female subjugation by projecting them onto the divine realm, or if these narratives also served a deeper mythological purpose, emphasizing the chaotic and unpredictable nature of cosmic power and portraying the gods not as moral exemplars but as forces of nature, embodying both creative and destructive aspects of the universe. Was it about societal norms or cosmic chaos that shaped Zeus's disturbing behavior? His rage, when provoked, was terrifying and indiscriminate. He hurled lightning bolts, not just at defiant titans, but at mortals who dared to challenge him, to reveal his secrets, or to boast of their own greatness. Asclepius, a mortal physician who learned to raise the dead, was struck down by Zeus's lightning for daring to upset the natural order, an act that deeply angered Apollo. Salmoneus, a mortal king who dared to mimic Zeus's thunder, was obliterated. Semele, seduced by Zeus, was incinerated when she foolishly asked to see him in his true divine form, a request subtly encouraged by a jealous Hera. His punishments were swift, often disproportionate, and utterly final. His justice, too, could be arbitrary. He was capable of grand pronouncements of justice, yet he frequently intervened in human affairs based on personal grudges, fleeting desires, or to protect his own pride. He might favor a particular hero, giving them an unfair advantage, or condemn an entire city for a minor offense that offended him or his divine offspring. The concept of universal fairness, of impartial judgment, was largely alien to his rule. Even other gods feared him. Hera, his long-suffering wife, perpetually plotted against his lovers and their children, but rarely dared to directly challenge Zeus himself. We'll dive into her misery next. Poseidon and Hades, his brothers, occasionally chafed under his authority, but ultimately submitted to his supreme power. His will was absolute, enforced with terrifying displays of cosmic might. You feel the ground tremble at his distant roar, hear the crackle of his lightning, and witness the profound terror he inspires in mortals and immortals alike. You realize that living under his tyrannical gaze is a constant gamble, a desperate attempt to avoid his attention, his lust, or his terrifying wrath. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about their flaws. It's about the terrifying power and horrifying actions of Zeus. Your very existence is at the mercy of a supreme tyrant, a serial abuser who ruled with an iron fist and a fiery temper, transforming his divine glory into a constant, terrifying shadow of unpredictable violence and profound injustice. A chilling testament to the terrifying price of absolute, unchecked power in the cosmos. Having witnessed the terrifying power and horrifying actions of Zeus, your gaze now shifts to his long-suffering, yet equally brutal, divine counterpart, Hera, jealous, vengeful. Forget the benevolent queen of the gods or the gentle patroness of marriage. Hera, the mighty wife of Zeus, was a relentless, often petty, and terrifyingly vindictive deity, whose furious jealousy and insatiable thirst for revenge routinely inflicted agonizing suffering on Zeus's countless lovers and their innocent offspring, turning her divine protection into a chilling cosmic threat. You quickly learn that drawing her wrath is a fate worse than a lightning bolt, because her punishments are slow, insidious, and utterly relentless, often targeting the blameless. It's like being trapped in a dysfunctional cosmic soap opera, where the queen's jealousy drives every plot, and you, an innocent mortal, are always the collateral damage. You stand on Olympus, or perhaps in a mortal realm, observing the queen of the gods. She is undeniably majestic, regal in her bearing, often depicted with a scepter and a diadem, embodying the sanctity of marriage and childbirth. She is the protector of women and the guardian of wedlock, a formidable and awe-inspiring presence. But beneath this veneer of dignified majesty lies a heart consumed by a searing, perpetual jealousy. Fueled by Zeus's incessant infidelities, remember his serial abuses from Section 2. Her wrath, once ignited, is a force of nature, brutal and unforgiving, often unleashed with a terrifying, indiscriminate fury. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of the Queen of the Gods is that ancient Greek myths are replete with accounts of Hera, the Queen of the Gods, engaging in relentless, often cruel, and disproportionate acts of revenge against Zeus's mortal and divine lovers and their innocent children, inflicting madness, torment, and even death upon them, primarily driven by her furious jealousy over Zeus's numerous infidelities. Her actions consistently highlight the dark side of divine retribution. Think about it. Your idea of a protector of marriage punishes everyone but the cheater. Imagine the agonizing fates she inflicted. Io, a nymph beloved by Zeus, was transformed into a cow by Zeus to hide her from Hera, but Hera, not fooled, demanded the cow as a gift. She then tormented Io relentlessly, sending a gadfly to sting her incessantly across vast continents, driving her to madness and perpetual flight until she was finally freed in Egypt. Callisto, another nymph, was turned into a bear and nearly killed by her own son, all for attracting Zeus's attention. Semele, the mortal mother of Dionysus, a god we'll meet later, was tricked by Hera into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his true form, leading to her incineration. Recall Zeus's terrifying power. Section 2. The consequences of simply being associated with Zeus's affections were universally devastating. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the depth of Hera's vindictiveness and her strategic long game is her relentless persecution of Heracles, Zeus's most famous illegitimate son. From his birth, She sent snakes to his cradle, later drove him to madness, causing him to kill his own family, and instigated the 12 labors, hoping each would lead to his death. Imagine a vengeful stepmother god constantly trying to kill you from the moment you're born, making your entire life an endless series of divinely orchestrated dangers. Historians still argue whether the consistent portrayal of Hera's extreme jealousy and vengefulness in Greek myths was primarily a reflection of patriarchal Greek society's anxieties about female agency and the disruptive power of female emotion. Projecting societal fears about women's uncontrolled passions onto the divine realm, or if her actions also served a deeper mythological purpose, embodying the inevitable, destructive consequences of unchecked male desire. Zeus's promiscuity and the harsh realities of fate in a chaotic cosmos, making her a force of cosmic retribution rather than mere petty jealousy. Was it about societal anxieties or cosmic balance that made Hera so terrifyingly vengeful? Her wrath extended beyond Zeus's lovers. She punished those who defied her authority or her sacred domain. Tiresias, the prophet, was blinded by Hera for siding with Zeus in an argument about sexual pleasure, though Zeus later compensated him with prophetic sight. The Trojans, who dared to judge Aphrodite more beautiful than Hera in the judgment of Paris, faced her implacable hatred, which contributed to the devastating Trojan War, wiping out an entire city for a slight to her pride. Her anger was absolute, and its targets were often simply unlucky mortals caught in her crossfire. Her tools of vengeance were varied, sending monstrous beasts like the Lernaean Hydra, which attacked Heracles, inflicting madness, instigating wars, or orchestrating fatal accidents. Her punishments were rarely quick. They were prolonged, insidious, and psychologically devastating, breaking down her victims slowly, often leaving them in perpetual torment, a far cry from Zeus's instant incineration. She preferred to watch her victims suffer, ensuring their misery was complete. Even other gods often feared her. Zeus himself, despite his supreme power, would sometimes go to great lengths to conceal his affairs, knowing the ferocity of her retribution if he was exposed. The Olympian court constantly had to navigate her volatile moods and avoid provoking her ire, lest they too become targets of her relentless fury. You feel the profound terror she inspires, the chilling awareness that her beauty masks a heart consumed by bitterness and a terrifying capacity for cruelty. You witness the suffering of her victims, realizing that living under her watchful, jealous gaze is a constant gamble, a desperate attempt to avoid her attention, her anger, or her ingenious methods of torment. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about Zeus's tyranny. It's about the brutal, relentless wrath of Hera. Your very existence is at the mercy of a jealous, vengeful queen, transforming her divine majesty into a constant, terrifying shadow of unpredictable retribution, ensuring that her personal grudges inflicted immense, prolonged suffering on countless innocent mortals, a chilling testament to the terrifying price of unchecked, jealous power in the cosmos. Having witnessed the terrifying, jealous wrath of Hera, your gaze now turns from the sky to the tumultuous depths below, where another volatile, profoundly dangerous Olympian holds sway. Poseidon raging, petty, forget the calm, wise ruler of the ocean, the god of the seas, earthquakes, and horses, was a powerful, unpredictable, and often deeply vindictive deity whose furious temper and petty grudges routinely unleashed devastating storms, cataclysmic earthquakes, and monstrous sea creatures upon mortals, transforming the very waters that surrounded Greece into a terrifying, uncontrollable threat. You quickly learn that drawing his wrath is a fate worse than any shipwreck, because his punishments are immense, indiscriminate, and utterly inescapable, often swallowing entire cities for the slightest offense. It's like being a sailor whose ultimate boss is a very powerful, very angry, and very easily offended giant who can literally cause the ground to shake just because he's in a bad mood. You stand by the sun-drenched shores of the Aegean Sea, or perhaps on a ship, feeling the gentle swell of the waves. The air is fresh with the scent of salt and the distant cry of gulls. But a subtle tension lingers beneath the surface, a chilling awareness of the immense, unpredictable power that resides in the depths. Poseidon, often depicted with his mighty trident, is a formidable god, commanding the very waters that define ancient Greek life, whether for trade, fishing, or travel. His power is undeniable, but so is his profound instability. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of the sea god is that ancient Greek myths are replete with accounts of Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes, unleashing devastating storms, shipwrecks, and cataclysmic seismic events upon mortals and even other gods as a result of his furious temper, petty grudges, or perceived insults, consistently portraying him as a powerful but highly unpredictable and often destructive divine force. His wrath was a constant, terrifying peril for all who lived near or traveled upon the sea. Think about it. Your idea of a divine protector of the sea might be a calm, guiding force. Theirs was a celestial tantrum waiting to happen. Imagine the sudden onset of his fury. A calm, sunlit sea can, in minutes, transform into a churning maelstrom of towering waves, violent winds, and torrential rain. Your ship, once a sturdy vessel, is tossed like a toy, its timbers groaning, its mast threatening to snap. Remember those terrifying storms and shipwrecks from the medieval explorer script. Section 6. Now imagine a god causing them. The roar of the tempest is deafening, filling the air with the screams of sailors and the terrifying sound of splintering wood. Poseidon, striking his trident, could unleash the full, terrifying power of the ocean, ensuring no one survived his divine rage. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the depth of Poseidon's pettiness and his long memory for slights is his relentless persecution of Odysseus. After Odysseus blinded Poseidon's son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, Poseidon tormented the hero for years, sending storms, stranding him on islands, and delaying his return home by a decade, simply to avenge his son's injury. Imagine a sea god holding a grudge for 10 years, actively trying to ruin your entire life and prevent you from going home, all for one moment of anger. Historians still argue whether the Greek myths depicting Poseidon's unpredictable and violent temper and his role in natural disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis primarily served as a cultural mechanism for ancient Greeks to rationalize and cope with the inherent unpredictability and destructive power of the natural world, especially the sea, and seismic activity, allowing them to personify uncontrollable forces. Or if these narratives also served a deeper mythological purpose, emphasizing the precariousness of human life in a cosmos where even the gods were flawed and prone to destructive emotions, making human suffering an accepted byproduct of divine whims. Was it about understanding nature's chaos or reflecting human flaws that shaped Poseidon's disturbing behavior? His wrath wasn't limited to the sea. As the god of earthquakes, he could make the very ground tremble and crack. Entire cities could be swallowed by fissures. Monumental buildings toppled into ruins, all due to his seismic rage. He famously competed with Athena for patronage of Athens, and when the Athenians chose Athena, his anger manifested as a devastating drought and floods. His fury could transform fertile lands into barren wastes or swallow them whole, simply for a perceived slight or a lost competition. His punishments were often disproportionate and deeply personal. He could transform mortals who displeased him into sea monsters, or curse their lineage for generations. Medusa, originally a beautiful priestess of Athena, was raped by Poseidon in Athena's temple, and Athena, in a twisted act of justice, then punished Medusa by turning her into the Gorgon with snake hair. This horrifying transformation, initially a product of Poseidon's assault, shows the destructive ripple effects of his unchecked desires and the cruel nature of divine justice. Even other gods often treated him with caution. While he sometimes allied with Zeus or Hades, his volatile temper and independent streak made him a powerful, unpredictable force. His brothers might occasionally calm his rage, but they ultimately respected his immense power over the elements. Knowing his fury could wreak havoc on both mortals and immortals alike, you feel the ground beneath your feet, or the deck of your ship, subtly trembling. Hear the distant rumble of the waves, and witness the profound terror he inspires in mortals and even other deities. You realize that living near his domain is a constant gamble, a desperate attempt to avoid his attention, his petty jealousy, or his terrifying, indiscriminate wrath. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about Zeus's tyranny or Hera's vengeance. It's about the brutal, unpredictable, and often profoundly petty temper of Poseidon. Your very existence is at the mercy of a raging sea god, transforming his divine glory into a constant, terrifying shadow of unpredictable storms, earthquakes, and personal vendettas, ensuring that his immense power was a source of constant dread for all who dared to venture near his vast, untamed domain. A chilling testament to the terrifying price of offending a god who literally controlled the very ground beneath your feet and the waters you sailed. Having experienced the terrifying, unpredictable fury of Poseidon, your journey through the disturbing truth about Greek gods now takes you away from the vibrant sunlit world into the deepest, darkest, and most inescapable realm Hades' grim abductor. Forget the benevolent, misunderstood ruler of the dead often portrayed in modern media. The Lord of the Underworld was a feared, unyielding deity, whose domain was the realm of shadows and the deceased, and whose most famous act involved the brutal abduction and forced marriage of an innocent goddess, turning the very concept of death and the afterlife into a chilling reminder of his cold, absolute power. You quickly learn that entering his domain, whether living or dead, is a one-way trip, and that his justice is grim, his actions final, and his desires, however shocking, utterly unopposed. It's like being forced into a very dark, very permanent arranged marriage, where your new husband is the king of the dead, and the only escape is a trick involving magic pomegranates. You stand at the edge of the mortal world, perhaps near a cavern believed to be an entrance to the underworld, or by the banks of a river like the Styx, where the souls of the dead were ferried. The air is cold, still, and heavy with a profound sense of finality. Hades, often depicted with his helm of invisibility, is a shadowy, imposing figure, rarely seen on Olympus, preferring the grim quiet of his subterranean kingdom. He rules over the vast legions of the dead, his word absolute, his domain inescapable. Mortals feared even speaking his name aloud, often using euphemisms like Pluto, the wealthy one, to avoid drawing his terrifying attention. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines Hades' most disturbing act is that the central myth of Hades involves his abduction and forced marriage of Persephone, the innocent daughter of Demeter, dragging her against her will to the underworld to be his queen, an act that caused immense suffering to her and her mother, and ultimately led to the creation of the seasons in Greek mythology. This act of abduction and sexual violence is a defining characteristic of his mythology, not a romantic tale. Think about it. The king of the dead literally kidnapped his bride. Imagine the sudden, terrifying moment of the abduction. Persephone, innocent and unaware, is gathering flowers in a sunlit meadow when the earth suddenly splits open. Hades, in his chariot pulled by black horses, bursts forth from the chasm, seizes her, and drags her screaming into the terrifying darkness of his realm, the chasm closing behind them. Her cries are unheard, her pleas unanswered, her fate sealed by the sudden, brutal act of a god pursuing his desires with absolute impunity. The sheer violation, the terror of being ripped from the familiar world and forced into an eternal, unchosen union, is profound. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the grim pragmatism of the Greek gods and the limited power even Zeus had over Hades' domain is that once Persephone consumed even a few pomegranate seeds in the underworld, she was ritually bound to remain there for a portion of the year, symbolizing her unbreakable connection to Hades and his realm. This detail, seemingly small, highlights the powerful, inescapable laws of the underworld that even the gods had to respect, and the irreversible consequences of partaking in its fruits. Imagine a single fruit literally sealing your fate for a third of every year, condemning you to an unwanted marital existence. Historians still argue whether the myth of Persephone's abduction, despite its apparent brutality, primarily served as an allegorical explanation for the changing seasons and the cycle of death and rebirth in agriculture, providing a mythical framework for natural phenomena, or if it also reflected a deeper societal anxiety about the forced marriages of young women in ancient Greece, projecting human patriarchal practices and the lack of female consent onto the divine realm, thereby normalizing such power dynamics. Was it about natural cycles or societal norms that shaped Hades' disturbing actions? Hades' domain, the underworld, was a grim, inescapable reality for all mortals. Once a soul entered his realm, there was no return. He was an unyielding, incorruptible ruler, his decrees absolute. He rarely meddled in the affairs of the living, preferring the solemn quiet of his kingdom, but his presence was always a chilling reminder of mortality and the ultimate, final judgment. Unlike his brothers Zeus and Poseidon, who might intervene arbitrarily in human lives, Hades was the god of finality, of irreversible ends. His justice, within his domain, was grim but unwavering. He presided over the judgment of the dead, assisted by figures like Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus, ensuring that each soul received its due in the afterlife, whether eternal torment in Tartarus, blessed serenity in the Elysian fields, or an endless, aimless wandering in the asphodel meadows. His decisions were absolute, without appeal. Even other gods often feared or respected Hades' authority, preferring to avoid his grim realm unless absolutely necessary. He rarely visited the upper world, making his presence all the more unsettling when he did appear. His power was not flashy like Zeus's lightning, or tumultuous like Poseidon's storms, but quiet, pervasive, and utterly absolute over the deceased. You feel the chilling stillness of the air, the profound sense of finality that permeates his domain, and the terrifying knowledge that his actions are irreversible, his power inescapable. You gaze into the vast, shadowy expanse of the underworld, realizing that living under his unyielding gaze means confronting your own mortality, and that his desires, however brutal, are beyond challenge. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about Zeus's tyranny or Hera's vengeance. It's about the grim, unyielding power of Hades. Your very soul is subject to his domain, transforming his rule into a constant, terrifying shadow of inescapable death and an unchosen fate, ensuring that his grim reign over the deceased and his disturbing abduction of Persephone were chilling reminders of the absolute, and often brutal, finality of the cosmic order. Having glimpsed the grim, inescapable power of Hades, your understanding of the disturbing truth about Greek gods now turns to a figure often associated with beauty, light, and harmony, yet capable of terrifying, arrogant cruelty. Apollo arrogant, cruel. Forget the gentle patron of music and healing, the god of the sun. Archery, prophecy, and medicine was a vain, jealous, and profoundly vindictive deity whose swift, often disproportionate, punishments for perceived slights, boasts, or romantic rejections inflicted agonizing suffering, madness, and gruesome death upon mortals and even other gods, turning his radiant presence into a chilling cosmic threat. You quickly learn that his golden bow fires not just arrows of light, but arrows of disease and divine wrath, and that his supposed wisdom is often a prelude to profound torment. It's like being a talented artist whose patron is a very handsome, very powerful, but utterly narcissistic and utterly ruthless tyrant who will destroy your life if you accidentally make him look bad or steal his girlfriend. You stand in a sun-drenched grove, perhaps near a temple dedicated to Apollo, feeling the warmth of his divine presence. He is undeniably magnificent, depicted as eternally youthful, with flowing golden hair, wielding a lyre or a golden bow and quiver of arrows. He is the patron of music, poetry, healing, and prophecy, a bringer of light and order. But beneath this veneer of radiant beauty and supposed benevolence lies a profound arrogance and a chilling capacity for brutal, disproportionate retribution, especially when his pride is wounded or his romantic advances are rejected. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of this radiant god is that ancient Greek myths frequently depict Apollo inflicting brutal, often agonizing, punishments on mortals and even other deities for perceived insults, boasts of superiority, especially in music or prophecy, or rejections of his romantic advances, including flaying, turning people into animals, causing widespread disease plague, or inflicting permanent suffering, consistently portraying him as a powerful but deeply cruel and vengeful deity. His divine wrath was a pervasive source of terror for mortals. Think about it. Your idea of a sun god is warmth and life. Theirs was a celestial sniper who could send plagues your way if you looked at him wrong. Imagine the agonizing fates he inflicted. Marsyas, a satyr who dared to challenge Apollo to a musical contest and foolishly won, was brutally flayed alive by the enraged god, his skin nailed to a tree, a horrifying testament to Apollo's intolerance for perceived musical superiority. Niobe, a mortal queen who boasted that she had more children than Leto, Apollo's mother, suffered the ultimate retribution. Apollo and his twin sister Artemis, who also gets a terrible segment, mercilessly shot down all 14 of her children with their arrows, leaving her heartbroken and transformed into a weeping stone. These weren't mere accidents. They were deliberate acts of gruesome, drawn-out vengeance. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates Apollo's chilling blend of divine power and human-like emotional immaturity is his romantic pursuits, which often ended tragically or violently for the women he desired. Daphne, a nymph who wished to remain a virgin, was relentlessly pursued by Apollo until she was transformed into a laurel tree to escape him. Cassandra, a Trojan princess, was given the gift of prophecy by Apollo in exchange for her love. But when she rejected him, he cursed her so that no one would ever believe her prophecies, condemning her to a lifetime of seeing terrible futures that she was powerless to prevent or convince others of. A profound psychological torment, far worse than death. Imagine being given a superpower by a god, only for him to literally curse you with it just because you turned him down. Historians still argue whether the Greek myths depicting Apollo's extreme cruelty and vanity, particularly his harsh punishments for artistic or intellectual challenges, primarily served as a cultural warning against hubris, excessive pride, and the dangers of defying divine will, reflecting a societal lesson about humility, or if his actions also served a deeper mythological purpose, emphasizing the destructive side of creative and intellectual power when unchecked by compassion, making him a complex embodiment of both light and terrifying darkness. Was it a moral lesson, or a character study of a terrifying god? His arrows, often associated with the sun's rays, were also notorious for bringing plague and sudden death. In the opening of Homer's Iliad, Apollo unleashes a devastating plague upon the Achaeans for 9 days, striking down men and animals, simply because Agamemnon insulted one of his priests. This demonstrates his power to inflict widespread suffering indiscriminately, turning his divine light into a silent, invisible killer. You could be living your life, minding your own business, and suddenly find yourself dying from a mysterious illness, all because a god you never even met was offended by someone else. His justice, like Zeus's, could be arbitrary and unpredictable. He might offer healing and prophecy, yet just as easily send plagues or blind those who sought forbidden knowledge. He punished those who questioned his authority or dared to challenge his preeminence in any field. The very act of boasting, or striving for greatness, could trigger his brutal wrath, turning aspiration into a fatal flaw. Even other gods tread carefully around him. His immense power, combined with his unpredictable temper and ruthless vindictiveness, made him a formidable and often feared presence on Olympus. His bright, shining beauty masked a cold, unforgiving heart. You feel the constant tension, the chilling awareness that his radiant presence carries the terrifying potential for indiscriminate devastation. You gaze at the setting sun, its golden rays beautiful, but also filled with the implicit threat of disease and divine anger, remembering the agonizing fates of those who displeased him. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about Zeus's tyranny or Hera's vengeance. It's about the brutal, arrogant cruelty of Apollo. Your very existence is at the mercy of a radiant, yet profoundly vindictive, sun god, transforming his divine glory into a constant, terrifying shadow of unpredictable retribution, ensuring that his immense power was a source of constant dread for all who sought light, art, or wisdom, a chilling testament to the terrifying price of challenging cosmic talent or rejecting divine desire. Having witnessed the arrogant, cruel wrath of Apollo, your understanding of the disturbing truth about Greek gods now turns to his twin sister, a goddess of fierce independence and chilling retribution, Artemis cold, vengeful. Forget the gentle patroness of the wilderness or the protector of young girls, the goddess of the hunt, wild animals, and childbirth was a stern, unforgiving, and profoundly dangerous deity whose swift, merciless punishments for perceived slights, violations of chastity, or failures of respect inflicted agonizing suffering and gruesome death upon mortals, turning her pristine wildlands into terrifying hunting grounds where the prey was often human. You quickly learn that entering her sacred domain or challenging her strict rules meant facing a relentless, lethal pursuit, and that her arrows, though silent, were utterly inescapable. It's like being a nature enthusiast whose guide is a very beautiful, very skilled, but utterly ruthless hunter who will kill you without hesitation if you pick the wrong flower or look at her wrong. You stand in a dense, moonlit forest, or perhaps near a remote spring, a place sacred to Artemis. The air is crisp, cool, and silent, broken only by the rustle of leaves or the distant call of an owl. She is often depicted as eternally youthful, with a silver bow and quiver, surrounded by hunting dogs, moving through the wilderness with graceful precision. She is the protector of wild animals, the guardian of chastity, and a skilled huntress, a formidable and awe-inspiring presence. But beneath this veneer of pristine wilderness and fierce independence lies a profound coldness and a chilling capacity for brutal, unwavering retribution, especially when her strict moral code or her sacred domain is violated. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of the huntress goddess is that ancient Greek myths are replete with accounts of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, inflicting swift, merciless, and often agonizing punishments on mortals for perceived insults, accidental trespasses in her sacred groves, or violations of chastity, including transforming them into animals to be hunted, sending plagues or wild beasts, or personally slaying them with her arrows, consistently portraying her as a powerful but unyielding and vengeful deity. Her wrath was a pervasive source of terror for all who dared to cross her path. Think about it. Your idea of a protector of nature literally turns people into animals just for seeing her naked. Imagine the agonizing fates she inflicted. Actaeon, a mortal hunter, stumbled upon Artemis bathing naked in a sacred grove. For this unwitting trespass, Artemis, enraged by the violation of her privacy and chastity, swiftly transformed him into a stag. He was then hunted down and torn to pieces by his own hunting dogs, a horrifying and prolonged death orchestrated by the goddess, a direct consequence of a moment of accidental discovery. Callisto, a nymph and devoted follower of Artemis, was punished by Hera. Remember her jealous wrath from Section 3. She's always involved for an affair with Zeus, but Artemis also cast her out and eventually turned her into a bear in some versions of the myth, or simply drove her away for violating her vow of chastity, further highlighting the goddess's rigid enforcement of purity. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates Artemis's chilling blend of divine power and rigid adherence to her principles, even when seemingly arbitrary, is her association with sudden death in women. While she protected childbirth, a complex role given her virginity, she was also believed to inflict swift, painless death on women, particularly those who died in childbirth or those who died unexpectedly in their sleep, striking them down with her unseen arrows. Imagine praying to a goddess for safe delivery, knowing she might also be the one who painlessly kills you in the night. Historians still argue whether the consistent portrayal of Artemis's fierce independence, virginity, and brutal vengefulness in Greek myths was primarily a reflection of Greek society's anxieties about untamed nature and the power of female purity when outside patriarchal control, serving to warn against female defiance, or if her actions also served a deeper mythological purpose, embodying the unpredictable and dangerous aspects of the wilderness itself, and the harsh consequences of violating sacred boundaries, both natural and moral, making her a complex representation of both life and death in the wild. Was it about societal control or untamed nature that shaped Artemis's disturbing behavior? Her wrath wasn't limited to individuals. Like Apollo, she could unleash plagues and send wild beasts to torment mortals. She participated with Apollo in the merciless slaughter of Niobe's children. Remember that chilling act from Section 6. Apollo killed the sons, Artemis the daughters, wiping out an entire family for their mother's hubris. This joint act of divine infanticide highlights her shared capacity for brutal, indiscriminate retribution when her family's honor was slighted. Her tools of vengeance were her swift, silent arrows, diseases, and the wild animals she commanded. Her punishments were often precise, aimed at directly reversing the perceived offense or making the punishment fit the crime in the most horrifying way, like Actaeon being torn apart by his own dogs. She was an uncompromising enforcer of her own strict moral code, and those who deviated from it faced her implacable, lethal fury. Even other gods respected her fierce independence and her deadly precision. She rarely involved herself in the petty squabbles of Olympus unless her principles or her honor were directly involved, preferring the solitude of her wild domains. But when she acted, her retribution was swift, silent, and utterly devastating. You feel the cold, sharp precision of her judgment, the chilling awareness that her beauty masks an unforgiving heart and an unyielding commitment to her own code, often with no compassion for mortal frailty. You witness the agonizing fates of those who displeased her, realizing that living under her watchful, merciless gaze is a constant gamble, a desperate attempt to avoid her attention, her anger, or her ingenious methods of torment. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about Zeus's tyranny or Hera's vengeance. It's about the brutal, cold, and utterly vengeful wrath of Artemis. Your very existence is at the mercy of a fierce huntress goddess, transforming her divine glory into a constant, terrifying shadow of unpredictable retribution, ensuring that her personal principles inflicted immense, agonizing suffering on countless mortals. A chilling testament to the terrifying price of challenging sacred purity or trespassing in the divine wild. Having witnessed the fierce, unforgiving retribution of Artemis, your understanding of the disturbing truth about Greek gods now turns to a deity often seen as the embodiment of beauty and desire, yet capable of profound manipulation and destructive selfishness, Aphrodite. Manipulative, selfish. Forget the gentle goddess of love and passion, the Olympian deity of desire, beauty, and pleasure was a capricious, often cruel, and profoundly disruptive force, whose personal whims, jealousies, and insatiable vanity routinely inflicted emotional torment, ruinous affairs, and devastating conflicts upon mortals and gods alike, turning her supposed gifts of love into a chilling cosmic curse. You quickly learn that receiving her favor is often as dangerous as incurring her wrath, because her interventions are driven by self-interest and often leave a trail of heartbreak and destruction in their wake. It's like being granted a wish by a very beautiful, very powerful genie, but she always twists your desires into something terrible and uses your suffering for her own amusement. You stand in a rose-scented temple, or perhaps near a shimmering ocean where Aphrodite is said to have risen from the foam. She is undeniably captivating, depicted as eternally beautiful, with a radiant aura of charm and allure. She is the patroness of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation, a formidable and awe-inspiring presence. But beneath this veneer of exquisite beauty and seductive charm lies a profound self-centeredness and a chilling capacity for manipulation, often for the most petty of reasons, or to assert her own supremacy in matters of love and vanity. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of the goddess of love is that ancient Greek myths frequently depict Aphrodite initiating or orchestrating destructive love affairs, using her divine power to force unwanted passion upon mortals and gods, engaging in petty rivalries with other deities, Eshiguk, Hera, and Athena, and inflicting cruel punishments on those who defied her authority, denied her beauty, or rejected the concept of love, consistently portraying her as a powerful but deeply manipulative and selfish divine force. Her interventions consistently highlight the dark, coercive side of desire. Think about it. Your idea of a love goddess might be about healthy relationships. Theirs was about forced infatuation and breaking up marriages. Imagine the agonizing fates she orchestrated. She notoriously instigated the entire Trojan War when, promised by Paris a mortal prince the most beautiful woman in the world, she arranged for Helen, already married to Menelaus, to fall madly in love with Paris and elope, thereby igniting a decade-long conflict that devastated entire nations and cost countless lives, all for a fleeting prize in a beauty contest, the judgment of Paris. She forced Pasiphae, the queen of Crete, to fall madly in love with a bull, leading to the birth of the monstrous Minotaur, a terrifying consequence of divine vengeance against Pasiphae's husband Minos. These weren't mere accidents. They were deliberate acts of cosmic manipulation, twisting love into a destructive force for her own amusement or to settle scores. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates Aphrodite's chilling indifference to human suffering and her profound vanity is her punishment of Hippolytus, a chaste prince who vowed to remain a virgin and worshipped only Artemis, scorning Aphrodite and the very concept of love. Enraged by this slight, Aphrodite caused Hippolytus's stepmother, Phaedra, to fall desperately in love with him. When Hippolytus rejected Phaedra because of his vow, Phaedra, out of shame, falsely accused him of rape before committing suicide, leading to Hippolytus's tragic death by his own father's curse. Imagine a goddess destroying an entire family, leading to false accusations and a horrific death, simply because a mortal chose not to worship her or engage in physical love. Historians still argue whether the Greek myths depicting Aphrodite's manipulative and destructive actions, particularly her ability to force love and inflict ruinous passions, primarily served as a cultural explanation for the irrational and uncontrollable aspects of human desire and the unpredictable nature of love, reflecting a societal understanding of passion as both creative and devastating. Or if her actions also served a deeper mythological purpose, emphasizing the precariousness of human free will in a cosmos where even the most intimate emotions could be dictated by powerful, self-serving deities, making human suffering an accepted byproduct of divine whims. Was it about understanding passion or reflecting divine power that shaped Aphrodite's disturbing behavior? Her petty rivalries with other goddesses, particularly Hera and Athena, who resented her victory in the judgment of Paris, often led to her manipulating mortals as pawns in their divine squabbles, setting up love triangles or inciting conflicts that brought ruin to human lives for the sake of her own divine pride. Her tools were not just beauty and charm, they were her magical girdle, capable of making anyone fall in love, and her insidious ability to inflict uncontrollable passions, turning desire itself into a weapon. Her gifts of love were often curses in disguise. She might grant a mortal beauty or irresistible charm, only for that gift to lead to their ruin through jealousy, unwanted attention, or tragic circumstances. She was less concerned with the well-being of the lovers themselves and more with the outcome that pleased her vanity or fulfilled her personal agenda, turning human relationships into her own divine playground. Even other gods were not immune to her influence. She famously compelled Ares, the brutal god of war, to be her lover, a strange pairing that highlights her ability to soften even the most violent of deities, though their affair brought its own set of problems and scandal. Her power over desire was absolute, capable of bending even divine wills to her whim, making her a formidable and often feared presence on Olympus. Respected for her beauty, but also wary of her profound capacity for manipulation. You feel the subtle unease, the chilling awareness that her radiant beauty masks a heart consumed by vanity and a terrifying capacity for destructive manipulation. You witness the agonizing heartbreak and ruin she inflicts on mortals and gods alike, realizing that living under her seductive gaze is a constant gamble, a desperate attempt to avoid her attention, her matchmaking, or her profound, selfish interventions in matters of the heart. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about Zeus's tyranny or Hera's vengeance. It's about the brutal, manipulative, and utterly selfish power of Aphrodite. Your very emotions are subject to her whim, transforming her divine glory into a constant, terrifying shadow of unpredictable passion and profound emotional destruction, ensuring that her personal desires inflicted immense, agonizing suffering on countless mortals, a chilling testament to the terrifying price of challenging cosmic beauty or succumbing to divine desire, and leaving a trail of broken hearts and shattered lives in her wake. Having witnessed the manipulative and selfish desires of Aphrodite, your journey through the disturbing truth about Greek gods now turns to a deity of intoxicating pleasure and terrifying, unbridled chaos. Dionysus ecstatic. Brutal. Forget the jovial god of wine and revelry often depicted in cheerful myths, the Olympian deity of ecstasy, madness, and liberation was a profoundly disruptive and often terrifyingly violent force, whose frenzied cults and indiscriminate wrath could drive mortals to madness, dismemberment, and horrifying acts of savagery, transforming the pursuit of divine joy into a chilling plunge into primal chaos. You quickly learn that his gifts of wine and ecstasy come with a profound, terrifying price, and that succumbing to his divine frenzy could lead you to tear apart your own loved ones, turning blissful abandon into a bloody nightmare. It's like being invited to the wildest, most intoxicating party imaginable. But the main event involves everyone losing their minds and dismembering each other. And you might be next. You stand at the edge of a moonlit forest, or perhaps on a remote mountainside, where the sounds of pipes and drums grow louder, accompanied by wild shouts and ecstatic cries. The air is thick with the scent of wine, sweat, and something vaguely wild and uninhibited. You see figures, predominantly women, the maenads or bacchantes, dancing wildly, their hair unbound, their eyes glazed with divine frenzy, clutching thirsty fennel stalks topped with ivy or vine leaves. This is a Bacchic revel, a Dionysian ritual, and its atmosphere is intoxicating, drawing you in with its promise of liberation from societal norms, but also hinting at a terrifying, primal danger. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of the wine god's cult is that ancient Greek myths and historical accounts of Dionysian rites frequently describe episodes of extreme ecstasy that could devolve into brutal violence, including ritualistic dismemberment sparagmos of animals and occasionally humans, frenzied attacks on those who defied the god, and temporary madness inflicted upon his opponents, highlighting the chaotic and destructive aspects of his divine power. His worship was about uninhibited release, which often had terrifying consequences. Think about it. Your idea of a religious festival involves dancing. Theirs might involve ripping apart a goat with your bare hands. Imagine the progression of the frenzy. You might initially feel a sense of exhilaration, a blissful release from your earthly concerns. As the wine and the rhythmic music work their magic, your inhibitions melt away, your body moves freely, and your mind feels a profound connection to the wild, untamed forces of nature. The music grows louder, the dancing more frenzied, the cries more ecstatic. This is the promised ecstasy of Dionysus, a temporary madness that liberates the soul. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the terrifying loss of control during these frenzies is the myth of Pentheus, the king of Thebes, who scorned Dionysus and forbade his worship. Dionysus, in revenge, drove Pentheus's own mother, Agave, and her sisters into a Bacchic frenzy. Believing Pentheus to be a wild animal, they tore him limb from limb sparagmos, with Agave carrying his head on her thyrsus, only realizing what she had done after the divine madness subsided. Imagine being so consumed by religious ecstasy that you literally dismember your own son, believing him to be a beast, and then waking up to that horrifying reality. Historians still argue whether the Greek myths depicting Dionysian cults engaging in sparagmos and ritualistic violence were primarily literal accounts of historical practices, reflecting genuine acts of ecstatic human sacrifice and brutal communal rituals, or if these narratives were largely cautionary tales and literary exaggerations, designed to highlight the dangers of unchecked emotion and the chaos that could result from defying established social or religious order, thereby serving as a moral lesson. Was it literal practice or symbolic warning that depicted such brutal frenzy? The brutality, when it manifested, was terrifying. The Maenads, driven by divine madness, would engage in sparagmos, ritualistic tearing apart of live animals with their bare hands, consuming their raw flesh. Any mortal who dared to oppose Dionysus, or to interrupt his sacred rites, risked becoming the target of this frenzied violence, their bodies brutally dismembered by the maddened revelers, their cries unheard in the chaotic ecstasy. This was a chilling reminder that divine liberation could quickly devolve into horrifying savagery, turning worship into a nightmare. Dionysus's wrath was often disproportionate and aimed at those who denied his divinity or scoffed at his gifts. He drove the daughters of King Minos mad, causing them to develop a craving for human flesh, eventually turning them into bats. He inflicted madness upon entire populations, causing them to perform horrifying acts of violence against themselves or their loved ones. His power was to twist reality, to break the mind, turning the very source of pleasure into a tool of profound suffering. Even other gods were not always immune to his influence. His presence could bring joyous revelry, but also profound disruption to the established order of Olympus. His wild, untamed nature stood in stark contrast to the more orderly domains of Zeus or Apollo, making him a unique and often unsettling force in the pantheon. You feel the intoxicating pull of the music, the warmth of the wine, and the tempting invitation to lose yourself in the frenzied dance. But beneath the allure of ecstasy, you sense the profound, chilling danger of losing control, of succumbing to a divine madness that could lead you to perform unspeakable acts. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about their flaws. It's about the terrifying, unbridled power of Dionysus. Your very being is subject to his intoxicating influence, transforming his divine gifts into a constant, terrifying gamble with your own sanity and morality, ensuring that his ecstatic presence was a source of both blissful liberation and profound, horrifying violence, a chilling testament to the terrifying price of challenging cosmic revelry or succumbing to divine frenzy, where joy could turn to dismemberment in a single, terrifying, ecstatic breath. Having witnessed the intoxicating and brutal frenzy unleashed by Dionysus, your understanding of the disturbing truth about Greek gods now turns to another deity of unbridled violence, often far less subtle in his destructiveness, Ares, bloodthirsty, reckless. Forget the noble strategic general. The god of war was a chaotic, impulsive, and profoundly brutal deity, whose insatiable lust for bloodshed and reckless disregard for consequences routinely inflicted immense suffering, pointless carnage, and widespread devastation upon mortals and even other gods, turning the very concept of conflict into a terrifying, visceral nightmare. You quickly learn that his presence on a battlefield ensures nothing but chaos and death, and that his supposed courage is often just a mask for his profound, destructive impulsiveness. It's like being caught in a permanent, global bar fight, but one of the brawlers is a massive, incredibly powerful, utterly amoral god who loves nothing more than seeing everyone get hurt. And you're just trying to survive. You stand on a battlefield, perhaps during the Trojan War, or a less famous but equally brutal conflict between Greek city-states. The air is thick with dust, the metallic tang of blood, and the terrifying screams of men. Ares, often depicted in gleaming armor, wielding a spear and shield, is a fearsome sight. He is the embodiment of the raw, uncontrolled violence of war, the primal urge to kill and destroy. He doesn't strategize or plan. He revels in the chaos, driven by an insatiable hunger for bloodshed. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of the god of war is that ancient Greek myths consistently portray Ares as a brutal, impulsive, and bloodthirsty deity who delighted in senseless carnage and often acted recklessly, causing widespread destruction and suffering for mortals, and was often despised or feared even by other Olympian gods, including his own father, Zeus, and sister, Athena, who viewed him as uncivilized and barbaric. His nature was profoundly destructive, focusing on the sheer violence of conflict rather than its glory. Think about it. Your idea of a war god might be a strategic genius. Theirs was basically a cosmic bully who loved to fight. Imagine his presence on a battlefield. He doesn't just encourage conflict, he actively participates, often on both sides, sowing discord and inciting men to greater brutality. He is driven by the sheer thrill of combat, the smell of blood, the sounds of agony. He cares little for victory or defeat, only for the ongoing, escalating violence. He might favor one side one day and another the next, based purely on a whim or a passing desire for greater carnage. His influence turns ordered lines into a chaotic melee, disciplined soldiers into bloodthirsty brutes. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates Ares's utter recklessness and his tendency to be easily wounded. despite being a god, is the Homeric account of him being injured multiple times in battle, even by mortals like Diomedes, aided by Athena, and then retreating from the field, loudly complaining about his wounds. Imagine the god of war, a supposedly invincible deity, constantly getting hurt in fights and then whining to his father Zeus about it, proving he's not quite as formidable as he seems. Historians still argue whether the Greek myths depicting Ares as a despised and often incompetent god of war compared to Athena, who represented strategic warfare, primarily served as a cultural commentary on the destructive and chaotic nature of senseless violence, differentiating it from noble or justifiable conflict, or if his portrayal also reflected a subtle warning against impulsive aggression and unchecked brutality, emphasizing the negative consequences of war when devoid of wisdom or reason. Was he a condemnation of war, or just a really bad fighter? His family life, though intertwined with Aphrodite, remember her manipulative nature from Section 8, was equally chaotic. Their affair, passionate yet destructive, highlights his impulsive nature. He was often mocked by other gods for his lack of strategic thinking and his tendency to rush headlong into battle without considering the consequences. He was not admired for his intelligence or his leadership, but rather feared for his raw, destructive power. His interventions in human affairs were almost always devastating. He might incite wars for petty reasons, or cause entire cities to be destroyed through his reckless incitement of conflict. He cared little for the lives of mortals caught in his brutal domain. Their suffering was merely a byproduct of his insatiable thirst for bloodshed. He reveled in the screams, the agony, and the sheer volume of carnage, turning every conflict into a personal playground of violence. Even other gods, including Zeus, remember his anger at Ares in the Iliad, often held him in contempt, viewing him as a brutish, uncivilized force. They might respect his power, but they rarely admired his methods. He was a necessary evil, the embodiment of war, but a force to be contained, not celebrated. By the more ordered Olympians, you feel the raw, terrifying energy of the battlefield, the chaos, the desperate cries of men, and the chilling knowledge that a god, unseen, is reveling in the carnage. You hear the clang of weapons, the thud of bodies, and you understand that this is the domain of Ares, utterly devoid of mercy or reason. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about their flaws. It's about the brutal, bloodthirsty, and utterly reckless nature of Ares. Your very existence is at the mercy of a chaotic war god, transforming his divine glory into a constant, terrifying shadow of unpredictable violence and senseless carnage, ensuring that his immense power was a source of constant dread for all who sought peace. A chilling testament to the terrifying price of unbridled aggression in the cosmos, where war was less a strategy and more an unending, brutal, and utterly pointless bloodfest. Having witnessed the chaotic, brutal power of Ares, your understanding of the disturbing truth about Greek gods now turns to a deity whose wrath stemmed not from petty vanity or bloodlust, but from profound, agonizing grief. Demeter grieving, punishing. Forget the gentle goddess of harvest and fertility often depicted in pastoral scenes, the Olympian deity of agriculture and the earth's bounty, when her beloved daughter was stolen, became an implacable, terrifying force of nature, plunging the entire mortal world into a devastating, widespread famine, turning her divine sorrow into a chilling cosmic curse for all humanity. You quickly learn that interfering with a mother's love, even a divine one, comes with a profound, terrifying price. and that her grief can literally starve the entire world, making her sorrow a global catastrophe. It's like being dependent on a single, all-powerful farmer for your entire food supply. But she's so heartbroken she decides to just stop growing food, and everyone, everywhere, slowly starves to death. You stand in a once fertile field, now parched and barren, the soil cracked and dry beneath your feet. The usual sounds of rustling grain and buzzing insects are replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the mournful whisper of the wind through dead stalks. The air is thick with the scent of dust and desperation. You remember Demeter as the benevolent goddess who blessed the earth with abundance, bringing forth grain, fruit, and life. But now, her very presence is a chilling reminder of her profound, active sorrow and its devastating consequences for the mortal realm. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines Demeter's most terrifying act and its impact is that the central myth of Demeter involves her profound grief and rage after her daughter Persephone's abduction by Hades, leading her to withdraw her divine favor from the earth, causing a devastating, widespread famine that threatened to wipe out all mortal life, thereby forcing Zeus and the other Olympians to intervene to resolve the crisis and bring an end to humanity's suffering. Her personal sorrow almost extinguished all life on Earth. Think about it. Your idea of a grieving mother might be sadness. Theirs was a global catastrophe. Imagine the agonizing famine she inflicted. After Persephone was dragged to the underworld by Hades, remember that grim abductor from Section 5. Demeter, consumed by grief, abandoned her sacred duties. She wandered the earth, disguised as an old woman, searching for her lost daughter. As her sorrow deepened, she withheld her divine blessings from the land. The grain refused to sprout. The trees bore no fruit. The fields withered and died. The earth became barren, dry, and utterly unproductive. The sun shone. The rains fell, if at all, but nothing grew, for Demeter's divine will prevented all growth. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the depth of Demeter's grief and her human-like emotional extremes is her refusal to return to Olympus or partake of ambrosia and nectar. Sustaining herself only on a simple gruel provided by grieving mortals, until her daughter was returned. This profound, stubborn refusal to acknowledge her divine status and basic needs until her sorrow was appeased highlights her single-minded focus on her daughter's return. Imagine a goddess so heartbroken that she goes on a hunger strike, and her personal protest literally causes a global famine, showing just how profoundly her personal emotions impacted the cosmos. Historians still argue whether the myth of Demeter's withdrawal and the subsequent global famine was primarily an allegorical explanation for the changing seasons and the cycle of death and rebirth in agriculture, providing a mythical framework for natural phenomena, or if it also served a deeper mythological purpose, emphasizing the immense, destructive power of a mother's grief when violated, and the profound dependence of humanity on divine favor for its very survival. Was it about natural cycles, or profound maternal emotion that shaped Demeter's terrifying punishment? The famine she unleashed was widespread and relentless. Mortals starved by the thousands, their bodies wasting away, their cries echoing across the barren lands. Livestock perished, and cities emptied as people desperately sought sustenance where none could be found. The gods themselves grew anxious, as the absence of mortal sacrifices and prayers due to mass death threatened to diminish their own power and influence. The suffering was so immense that Zeus himself was eventually forced to intervene, sending Hermes to the underworld to negotiate Persephone's return. Understanding that Demeter's grief threatened the very existence of humanity, and by extension, the gods' worship, her justice, when it manifested, was absolute and indiscriminate. She punished the entire mortal world for a crime committed against her by Hades, caring little for the innocent lives caught in her cosmic curse. Her focus was singular, her daughter's return, and all other life was secondary to her profound sorrow. Her wrath, unlike Ares's chaotic brutality, remember him from section 10, was a slow, agonizing process of deprivation, a quiet, pervasive form of devastation that consumed life through starvation. Even other gods tread carefully around her. Her grief was so profound, her anger so absolute, that even Zeus found himself struggling to manage her. He understood that her power over the earth's fertility was absolute, and that her personal sorrow could bring about global catastrophe. You feel the parched earth beneath your feet, the dust in your throat, and the profound, chilling realization that your very existence and the sustenance of all life is at the mercy of a god's personal suffering. You gaze at the barren fields, then to the sky, desperately praying for relief, knowing that only the goddess herself, or the intervention of Zeus, can bring an end to this widespread agony. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about Ares's brutal impulsiveness. It's about the terrifying grieving and utterly punishing power of Demeter. Your very survival is subject to her profound sorrow, transforming her divine love into a cosmic curse, ensuring that her personal grief unleashed immense, agonizing suffering on countless mortals. A chilling testament to the terrifying price of divine sorrow and humanity's utter dependence on the capricious favor of powerful deities for its very existence, where a mother's heartbreak could literally starve the world. Having witnessed the global devastation wrought by Demeter's profound grief, your understanding of the disturbing truth about Greek gods now settles on perhaps their most unsettling characteristic: mortal interactions, cruel whims. Forget benevolent protectors or divine guides always acting for the greater good. The Olympians routinely intervened in human lives with startling indifference, profound cruelty, and often for the most petty, personal, or even utterly arbitrary reasons, turning human existence into a constant gamble with forces that viewed mortals as mere playthings. You quickly learn that your life, however virtuous or tragic, is utterly insignificant in the grand cosmic scheme, and that even a fleeting glance from a deity could bring immense, unavoidable suffering, turning every divine encounter into a terrifying roll of the dice. It's like being a tiny ant in a giant's garden, and the giant casually decides to burn you with a magnifying glass, not out of malice, but simply because he's bored, or curious, or had a bad day. You live in a Greek city-state, or perhaps tend your fields in the countryside. You meticulously perform your daily prayers, offer sacrifices at the local altars, and participate in religious festivals, hoping to gain favor from the gods, or at least avoid their wrath. But the stories you hear, the myths recounted by poets and elders, paint a chilling picture of divine indifference. Your piety, your virtues, your suffering, all seem to mean little when a god's personal desire or a petty squabble on Olympus, remember those endless feuds from section 1, dictates their intervention in your life. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of a caring pantheon is that ancient Greek myths frequently depict the Olympian gods interfering in mortal lives with profound indifference to human suffering, often for petty personal reasons, fleeting desires, or to settle divine grudges, leading to tragic fates, prolonged torment, and the arbitrary destruction of human lives without apparent justice or mercy. Mortals were often pawns in their divine games. Think about it. Your idea of divine intervention might be a helping hand. Theirs was a celestial kick in the teeth. Imagine the agonizing fates brought about by these cruel whims. You've already seen Io turned into a cow and tormented by a gadfly for being loved by Zeus Section 2, and Actaeon transformed into a stag and torn apart by his own dogs for accidentally seeing Artemis naked Section 7. These aren't isolated incidents. Sisyphus, a clever mortal, was condemned by Zeus to eternally roll a boulder uphill, only for it to roll back down, a pointless and endless torment, simply for daring to outwit the gods. Tantalus was cursed to eternal hunger and thirst, standing in a pool of water with fruit overhead, both forever out of reach, for offending the gods with his arrogance. These aren't punishments for profound evil, but for slight offenses, betrayals of trust, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the Romans who adopted many Greek gods. Remember, Roman parties. Section 1. More pragmatic approach to these unpredictable gods. Despite their own brutalities, is the common practice of Romans establishing precise contractual relationships with their deities duat des. I give, so that you may give. Seeking to explicitly bargain with the gods for specific favors, rather than just passively hoping to avoid divine wrath. Imagine trying to negotiate a specific deal with Zeus, offering him 100 goats if he promises not to turn your daughter into a spider, a very transactional approach to divine interaction. Historians still argue whether the Greek myths depicting gods' cruel and arbitrary interactions with mortals primarily served as a cultural explanation for the inherent unpredictability and harshness of life in the ancient world. Natural disasters, sudden misfortunes, unrequited love, allowing them to personify uncontrollable forces, or if these narratives also served a deeper sociological purpose, reflecting and subtly critiquing the arbitrary power wielded by human rulers and the profound social inequalities within Greek society, projecting human flaws onto the divine stage. Was it about understanding chaos or critiquing power that shaped the gods' cruel whims? The gods frequently intervened in human wars, not for justice, but to support their favored heroes, to settle divine scores, or simply to prolong the conflict for their own amusement. Recall Ares, the bloodthirsty, reckless god of war. Section 10. Delighting in carnage. They might send plagues like Apollo. Section 6. Cause famines. Demeter. Section 11. Or incite madness. Dionysus. Section 9. Their destructive powers unleashed with little regard for the thousands of mortal lives affected. Human suffering was often merely collateral damage, a side effect of their own divine dramas. Even when gods seemingly helped mortals, their interventions often came with a hidden cost or unintended, devastating consequences. A hero might receive divine aid to achieve a great feat, only for a jealous god or a long-forgotten prophecy to lead to his tragic downfall years later. Their gifts were rarely without strings, and their blessings could turn into curses. The psychological toll on mortals, living under the constant threat of these cruel whims, was immense. You would pray, offer sacrifices, and live by a strict moral code, not because it guaranteed safety, but because it was all you could do to perhaps slightly stack the odds in your favor, or at least avoid direct divine displeasure. The world was a precarious place, and your existence was a constant gamble with powers that were absolute, often unfeeling, and utterly beyond your control. You feel the profound terror the chilling indifference in the narratives of divine intervention, and the horrifying realization that your life is utterly insignificant in the vast cosmic game played by the Olympians. You gaze at the clouds, then to the sea, trying to live humbly, to avoid drawing too much attention, hoping to pass through life unnoticed by the powerful, capricious gods above. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about their individual flaws, it's about their collective, pervasive, and ultimately cruel indifference to human suffering. Your very existence is at the mercy of their unpredictable desires, transforming your life into a constant gamble with cosmic forces that wield absolute power, ensuring that even the most devout prayers could not guarantee safety from their arbitrary whims. A chilling testament to humanity's profound vulnerability in a world ruled by deeply flawed and often terrifying divinities. Having glimpsed the horrifying indifference of the gods to human suffering, your understanding of the disturbing truth about Greek gods now turns to a concept that should offer solace, but often brought only terror divine justice. Unpredictable. Harsh. Forget a clear code of conduct or a proportional response to wrongdoing. Punishment from the Olympians was frequently arbitrary, disproportionate, and utterly terrifying, inflicted for reasons that often seemed petty, obscure, or even accidental, turning the very concept of divine retribution into a chilling cosmic lottery. You quickly learn that appeasing the gods is a perilous gamble, and that a small offense, or even an unwitting trespass, could bring about a lifetime of agonizing torment or a swift, brutal, and utterly undeserved demise. It's like being subject to a legal system where the judge can decide to destroy your entire life for a parking ticket, just because he felt like it. And you have no right to appeal. You live your life, trying to be pious, offering sacrifices at local temples, honoring the gods in your daily prayers. You strive to avoid hubris, that excessive pride that often incurred divine wrath. But the myths whispered by storytellers, depicted in plays, and recounted by priests, paint a terrifying picture of a justice system driven by divine whims, personal grudges, and often an appalling lack of mercy. Your understanding of fairness and proportionality simply doesn't apply to the Olympians. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romanticized view of a just pantheon is that ancient Greek myths frequently depict the Olympian gods inflicting punishments on mortals and sometimes other deities that were arbitrary, disproportionate to the offense, or driven by petty jealousy, lust, or personal slights, often resulting in agonizing torment, madness, irreversible transformation, or death, highlighting a divine justice system that operated on unpredictable and often cruel whims rather than a consistent moral code. Their idea of justice was terrifyingly subjective. Think about it. Your idea of a just punishment might be a fine. Theirs was being turned into a spider. Imagine the countless victims of this harsh justice. You've already seen Actaeon turned into a stag and torn apart by his own dogs for accidentally seeing Artemis naked, Section 7. Io transformed into a cow and relentlessly tormented by a gadfly for being loved by Zeus, Section 2. Marsyas flayed alive by Apollo for daring to win a musical contest, Section 6. Cassandra cursed to speak prophecies no one would believe for rejecting Apollo, Section 6. These aren't consequences of profound evil. They are often the horrific results of unwitting trespass, a moment of pride, or simply being caught in the crossfire of divine dramas. The punishment often outweighed the crime by an astronomical margin, and there was no appeal. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the gods' unpredictable nature and the depth of their disproportionate wrath is the myth of Arachne, a mortal weaver, renowned for her skill, dared to boast that her weaving was superior to Athena's. Athena, enraged by this hubris, challenged her to a contest. When Arachne's tapestry was judged to be flawless and even depicted the god's own scandalous affairs, Athena, consumed by jealousy, destroyed Arachne's work and beat her. When Arachne tried to hang herself out of despair, Athena, in a twisted act of mercy, saved her by transforming her into a spider, condemning her to weave forever, a lifelong punishment for a single moment of pride and artistic excellence. Imagine being eternally transformed into an insect, simply because your art was too good. Historians still argue whether the Greek myths depicting such harsh and disproportionate divine punishments were primarily a cultural mechanism for ancient Greeks to warn against hubris, excessive pride, and the dangers of defying divine authority, reinforcing a societal need for humility. Or if these narratives also served a deeper mythological purpose, emphasizing the precariousness of mortal life in a chaotic cosmos, where even the gods were profoundly flawed, and human suffering was an inevitable consequence of unpredictable divine power, making their justice a reflection of life's inherent unfairness. Was it about moral lessons, or cosmic injustice, that shaped their cruel justice? The gods rarely acknowledged their own flaws or disproportionate responses. Their power was absolute, their will supreme, and their actions were, by definition, just because they were divine. This meant that mortals had no recourse, no way to argue their case, no hope for a fair hearing when caught in the crosshairs of divine wrath. A mortal might beg for mercy, offer endless sacrifices, but if a god was determined to inflict punishment, nothing could stop it. Their punishments were often prolonged and agonizing, designed to torment both body and mind. They might inflict madness, endless wandering, constant pain, or irreversible transformations that stripped individuals of their humanity. The goal was not just to kill, but to make the suffering a public, enduring spectacle, a terrifying warning to others. The very landscape of Greece was littered with the monuments of divine vengeance, a weeping stone, a cursed spring, a mountain where a hero suffered endlessly. Even other gods often held their peace when one of their Olympian brethren inflicted such punishments, perhaps out of fear, or a reluctant acceptance of the unpredictable nature of their shared power. Their own squabbles might be petty, but their methods of retaliation were universally brutal, and their justice, a terrifying reflection of their own human-like flaws magnified to a cosmic scale, was profoundly inconsistent and chillingly absolute. You feel the cold dread of knowing that your every action, every thought, could be scrutinized by jealous or easily offended gods, and that your fate could be sealed by a single, unwitting mistake. You pray diligently. You offer your sacrifices, but a subtle tremor of fear accompanies every act of piety, knowing that even the most devout can become victims of a passing divine whim. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about their flaws, it's about their terrifying, unpredictable, and utterly harsh divine justice. Your very existence is a constant gamble with cosmic forces that wield absolute power, ensuring that even a small offense could lead to agonizing, disproportionate, and utterly inescapable torment, a chilling testament to humanity's profound vulnerability in a world ruled by deeply flawed and terrifyingly powerful divinities. Having witnessed the cruel, unpredictable nature of divine justice and the horrifying indifference of the gods to mortal suffering, your understanding of the disturbing truth about Greek gods reaches its chilling genesis Origin myths, primordial violence. Forget tales of peaceful creation. The very birth and rise to power of the Olympian gods were rooted in a horrifying, bloody saga of patricide, castration, cannibalism, and tyrannical overthrow, revealing a cosmic history of unimaginable brutality that set a terrifying precedent for the violence and ruthlessness of the later pantheon. You quickly learn that the dysfunction and cruelty of the Olympians were not aberrations, but inherited traits, passed down through generations of divine conflict, turning the very foundation of their world into a horrifying testament to primordial savagery. It's like discovering that your entire family tree is rooted in a brutal, multi-generational civil war, where grandfathers eat their children and sons castrate their fathers, and you just have to live with that history. You listen to the ancient myths, perhaps recounted by a storyteller or a priest, tales that delve far back into the mists of time, before the Olympians even ruled. The names are primal, elemental chaos, Gaia earth, Uranus sky, Cronus, Rhea. These are not the familiar human-like gods of Olympus, but titanic, terrifying forces whose very existence was defined by raw, unchecked power and profound, often incestuous, conflict. The stories are visceral, disturbing, and utterly foundational to understanding the later behavior of Zeus and his kin. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any sanitized view of Greek mythology's beginnings is that the foundational Greek myths describing the origins of the gods and the universe, Hesiod's theogony, are characterized by a brutal cycle of successive generations of deities achieving power through horrific acts of patricide. Cronus castrating Uranus, Zeus overthrowing Cronus, cannibalism, Cronus devouring his children, and violent overthrow, establishing a primordial pattern of tyranny, rebellion, and brutal succession. The Olympian gods themselves rose from a horrifying legacy of violence. Think about it. Your supreme ruler got his throne by violently deposing his father, who had himself violently deposed his father. Imagine the first act of cosmic horror. Uranus, the primordial sky god, feared his own children. The Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, hundred-handed giants, in a terrifying act of tyranny, he imprisoned them deep within Gaia, the earth. Gaia, in agony, sought revenge. She fashioned a sickle from flint and urged her youngest son, Cronus, a powerful titan, to act. In a shocking act of filial brutality, Cronus ambushed his father Uranus, castrating him with the sickle and throwing his severed genitals into the sea. From this act of primordial violence, new deities emerged, born of blood and foam. This act of dismemberment and overthrow set the grim precedent for all divine succession, a particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the cyclical, inescapable nature of this primordial violence is the deliberate efforts by later generations of gods to replicate, or avoid, the very acts that brought their predecessors to power. Cronus, having overthrown his father Uranus, then feared that his own children would do the same. In a terrifying act of cannibalism, he swallowed each of his newborn Olympian children whole: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, as soon as they were born, desperately trying to avert his prophesied downfall. Imagine your idea of a loving grandparent involves them literally eating their own children to avoid losing power. Historians still argue whether the Greek origin myths, with their pervasive themes of violence, patricide, and the cyclical nature of power struggles among the gods, primarily served as a cultural explanation for the inherent chaos and brutality of the natural world and human existence. providing a mythological framework for understanding unpredictable forces. Or if they also subtly reflected and perhaps even justified the brutal realities of power transitions and dynastic struggles in ancient Greek society, making divine behavior a cosmic mirror of human conflict and the inevitable violence of politics. Was it about cosmic truth or societal reflection that shaped these disturbing origins? Then came Zeus, the youngest son of Cronus and Rhea. Rhea, unwilling to see her children devoured, tricked Cronus into swallowing a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes instead of Zeus. Zeus was secretly raised to maturity. He then returned, a powerful young god, and forced his father Cronus to regurgitate all the swallowed Olympian children, initiating the brutal Titanomachy, a 10-year war between the Olympian gods and the elder Titans. This was a cosmic civil war, shaking the very foundations of the universe, a brutal display of divine power clashing with primordial might. Zeus and his siblings, with the help of the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, whom Zeus freed from Tartarus, ultimately triumphed over Cronus and the Titans. The defeated Titans were then imprisoned in Tartarus, the deepest abyss of the underworld, a grim fate of eternal torment. This final act of divine victory solidified Zeus's rule, but it was a rule established through violence, rebellion, and the merciless overthrow of his own father, replicating the very act that brought Cronus to power. The cycle of violence, of sons usurping fathers, was deeply embedded in the very fabric of their divine lineage. This legacy of primordial violence permeated the very essence of the Olympian gods' character and their interactions with mortals. Zeus's tyranny, his insatiable lust, and his brutal punishments, remember those from Section 2, can be seen as inherited traits, echoing the unchecked power and arbitrary cruelty of his father and grandfather. Hera's jealousy, Section 3, and vengefulness stemmed directly from Zeus's infidelities, reflecting the pervasive consequences of his own inherited promiscuity. The violence of Ares, Section 10, and the destructive impulses of other gods can be understood as expressions of the raw, untamed forces that characterized their violent origins. You feel the profound horror of these foundational myths, the chilling realization that the Greek gods, for all their beauty and power, were born of blood, betrayal, and unspeakable acts. You gaze at the serene peaks of Olympus, then recall the terrifying tales of dismemberment, cannibalism, and cosmic war that brought it into existence. The awful truth about Greek gods isn't just about their flaws, it's about their shocking, bloody origin myths. Your very understanding of their divine nature is transformed by the pervasive story of primordial violence, ensuring that the legacy of Olympus and its profound impact on human lives was perpetually shadowed by the chilling, undeniable truth of its terrifying, brutal beginnings. A constant reminder that even gods could rise from chaos through horrifying acts of savagery. After enduring the tyrannical power of Zeus, the jealous wrath of Hera, the unpredictable fury of Poseidon, the grim abduction by Hades, the arrogant cruelty of Apollo, the cold vengeance of Artemis, the manipulative selfishness of Aphrodite, the ecstatic brutality of Dionysus, the bloodthirsty recklessness of Ares, the devastating grief of Demeter, the horrifying indifference of divine whims, the arbitrary harshness of divine justice, and the shocking primordial violence of their very origin myths. You finally emerge from our journey through the disturbing truth about Greek gods to confront its complex and enduring legacy-flawed divinities. The Olympian pantheon, for all its immense power and beauty, was profoundly human in its imperfections, its vices, and its cruelties. leaving an indelible mark on ancient Greek society that shaped their worldview, their ethics, their art, and continues to resonate in our understanding of power and morality. You realize that the very foundation of Greek civilization was built upon a profound acceptance of divine imperfection, a chilling reflection of humanity's own struggles with power and morality. It's like looking at a shattered, yet beautiful, marble statue, and realizing its cracks and imperfections tell a deeper, more honest story about the flawed beings it depicts. You reflect on the vivid contradictions. The gods were immortal, supremely powerful, capable of cosmic feats. Yet, they exhibited every human vice: lust, jealousy, anger, deceit, petty revenge, and profound indifference to suffering. They were not moral exemplars in the way later monotheistic deities would be. This duality, this constant tension between immense power and profound imperfection, was central to Greek understanding of the divine. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this complex legacy is that the depiction of Greek gods as powerful yet deeply flawed, human-like beings prone to vices like adultery, jealousy, and cruelty profoundly influenced ancient Greek society's worldview, ethics, and art, leading to a pragmatic and often fatalistic acceptance of human imperfection and the unpredictability of both divine favor and natural events. Their gods were a reflection of themselves, flaws and all. Think about it. Your idea of a perfect being might be flawless. Theirs was a celestial drama queen with a serious temper. Imagine the societal implications. The Greeks didn't expect their gods to be morally perfect. They simply expected them to be powerful and to exist. This pragmatic acceptance of divine imperfection might have subtly contributed to a more nuanced, less dogmatic approach to morality in human society itself. If even Zeus could be unjust, then perhaps human justice was always imperfect, a constant struggle. This could also have fostered a degree of humility, knowing that no mortal, however great, could truly escape the arbitrary whims of such powerful, flawed beings. Recall those cruel whims from section 12. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the Greeks' sophisticated, yet often unsettling way of grappling with their gods' morality is the development of philosophical critiques of traditional myths. Figures like Xenophanes of Colophon, 6th century BCE, openly criticized Homer and Hesiod for depicting gods with human vices, arguing for a more abstract, morally perfect deity. This intellectual critique existed alongside, and often challenged, the popular, traditional narratives. Imagine a society that simultaneously tells stories of gods committing terrible acts, and then has its philosophers publicly arguing that these gods are actually morally flawed and should be better. Historians still argue whether the Greek gods' human-like flaws primarily served as a crucial outlet for ancient Greeks to explore and debate complex ethical dilemmas. I.g., justice, fate, free will through mythological narratives, allowing them to externalize and understand human vices on a grand scale, or if it also inadvertently perpetuated a degree of moral ambiguity and fatalism in society, suggesting that since even the gods behaved badly, human immorality was inevitable and ultimately beyond strict control. Did it foster moral debate, or simply excuse bad behavior? The constant cycle of violence, betrayal, and suffering in the myths, from the primordial cannibalism of Cronus section 14 to Zeus's tyrannical rule section 2. Hera's vengeful plots, section 3, and Aphrodite's destructive manipulations section 8, reflected a chaotic cosmos. This often led to a fatalistic worldview among mortals. an acceptance that life was unpredictable, filled with unavoidable suffering, and ultimately subject to forces beyond human control. Piety was less about morality and more about ritualistic appeasement, trying to secure divine favor or simply avoid divine wrath in a capricious world. Yet, this complexity also allowed for incredible storytelling. The richness of Greek mythology, with its deeply flawed but compelling characters, inspired epic poetry, tragic dramas where human suffering often stemmed from divine interference, and vibrant art that explored the full spectrum of human experience. The gods were relatable precisely because they were so very human in their flaws, making their stories endlessly fascinating. The legacy of these flawed divinities endures. Our modern understanding of archetypes, of psychological complexes, and even the structure of storytelling owes a debt to these ancient myths. The very concepts of Zeus complex or Hera complex in psychology reflect the lasting power of their disturbing personalities. Their stories continue to resonate, reminding us that power, whether divine or mortal, often comes with a terrible price, and that the pursuit of personal desires, unchecked by morality, can lead to immense suffering for countless others. You stand now, perhaps a little more enlightened, perhaps a little more disturbed, by the profound humanity of these ancient gods. The awful truth about Greek gods is precisely what makes their legacy so powerful. It is the acceptance of their profound flaws, their petty cruelties, and their terrifying indifference that offers a chilling, yet honest, reflection of humanity itself. Their enduring myths serve as a permanent reminder that even divine glory can be steeped in brutality, and that the pursuit of power, unchecked by compassion, inevitably leaves a trail of profound suffering, a complex and captivating testament to the dark side of Olympus, and the enduring human fascination with cosmic power. Now, as the thunder of Olympus fades, and the echoes of ancient myths grow quiet, let the stillness of your room embrace you. The tyrannical gods, the jealous goddesses, the cruel whims, and the disturbing primordial violence are safely in the past, part of a history that now dissolves into the gentle hum of your fan. You've journeyed through a world where even divine power came with terrible flaws, and now it's time for you to find your own peaceful rest. Let your mind unwind, your muscles relax, and sink into a deep, undisturbed sleep, far from the unpredictable temperaments of the Greek gods. End of script. Sweet dreams.